Hey, what up, world? We're going to kick up here with the Max Kellerman and Stephen A. Smith show on ESPN. First Take. Head host Molly Karam. Real quickly, they need to get Molly Karam off the show. Ever since she dated and she got married to Jalen Rose, man, she's been a huge turnoff for the show. I don't really want to talk too much about her. She's been a loudmouth, always interrupts the crew, and I just can't stand her. It's already been 3 years long overdue for her. But no, the topic of discussion for today is about the Los Angeles Clippers. Pretty much with the core they have for their team as of right now, led by Kawhi Leonard. Will they ever win an NBA championship? And then along the lines of Paul George, they're going to give a little statement that they would think that he could possibly be the next Dwight Howard to pretty much, he'll probably be the next Dwight Howard to where he can never lead a team to a championship and pretty much underachieved in his career. We got to look at the whole complexity and longevity of Paul George and his team. Now, I'll jump into that in a second here, but basically the Los Angeles Clippers, they're fine where they're at whenever it comes down to the 2021 season. Now, let me kind of explain. It was a huge downfall. They lost to the Denver Nuggets in the second round, blowing a 3-1 series lead. Pretty much it was championship or bust on their side, because basically pretty much it was only the Lakers that should have came out of the West if it wasn't going to be the Clippers, and the Clippers had a better roster coming from their bench and starting lineup and their whole identity. I've always said the Lakers would win the West, so it didn't surprise me, but it surprised me they blew a 3-1 series lead and lost to the Denver Nuggets in the second round. So coming into 2021, the team they'll have the chemistry up together. Their core roster could still win the Western Conference. No need to hit that panic button. I think a lot of TV pundits and media members are wanting to pretty much blow up the team and with Paul George and Doc Rivers and kind of other pieces as well. I'm not going to jump that far. But with Paul George, he really needs to step it up. This is a huge awakening for his career. Back in the day, back in Indiana, when he was actually coached by Frank Vogel, they made 2 conference finals appearances. Paul George was the main guy for both of those conference finals teams. He was very young, around 23, 24 years of age. His game was due to his athleticism, due to his shoulder injury, and of course, when he had that horrific injury with Team USA, I think it was around 2014, 2015. I think it was 2014 in that range. Paul George ever since pretty much has relied on the perimeter and three-point shooting. He hasn't been really going in and driving in anymore. So mentally, that breaks you down as a kind of traumatizes him, let alone as athleticism defers down to his injuries. But let me jump into here. I'll get more of my take.
Because of the way that they performed in the last 3 games of this series, which ultimately sent them home, I think you keep them together. I don't think they necessarily need anything new in order to win a chip. You keep Doc Rivers, you keep that coaching staff, you keep every single one of those players, even though Montrezl Harrell is approaching free agency, and he's got some explaining to do as to why he only averaged 2.6 rebounds per game in this series when Jokic averaged 13 rebounds along with his 24 points on 51% shooting and nearly 40% from three-point range. I think that, obviously Harrell has something to prove. The biggest reason.
Real quickly, Montrezl Harrell, I swear, every time he goes down to the basket and he tries to hit a layup or something like that, he always gets a foul in the playoffs. They would grant him a foul every single time because he would always flop himself down on the ground shooting a single layup. It was crazy. It was crazy out there for Montrezl. It was very irritating.
The reason that I think that you keep them together is a couple of things. I think that Kawhi, being the superstar that he is, still a top 5 player in the game. I think he has a lot to make up.
Listen, Kawhi Leonard is the second greatest player on the planet as of right now. A lot of cats were kind of saying he was, before in the playoffs, if he was the best player or top 3. I've always stated LeBron James has always been the best player, and then it's been Kawhi Leonard too. Even though Kawhi lost in the second round of the playoffs, he's still number 2 for me on my list. We'll revisit that conversation with Steph Curry and Kevin Durant are healthy for the 2021 season and how they perform leading both the Brooklyn Nets and the Golden State Warriors.
For considering the fact that this was his first, venture into being that face of a franchise, that number one option with the expectations draped on his shoulders to come into the Clippers organization. Well, there's but so many games I'm going to play. There's but so many practices that I'm going to attend. I'm going to be in shape, make no mistake about it, but I'm going to show up with the practice when I want to show up. I'm going to miss practices when I feel I need to miss practices, etc., etc. As a leader of a franchise, you set a very, very bad tone. If you're Lou Williams, boy, do you have a lot of making up to do. The best part of you in this series was your post-game press conference in the aftermath of losing Game 7, because he was very eloquent and candid in his assessment of what transpired, but he only averaged 10 points this series, and he was horrific from three-point range, shoot like 14%. That's not Lou Williams. This is a two-time sixth man of the year. This brother is a star scoring the basketball. He is a professional scorer. There was no excuse for him to be as anemic as he was, other than the fact that clearly you didn't really want to be there. That's why they got a new nickname for you, Lemon Pepper Lou. You will understand why that transpired. You've got some making up to do. And then, of course, there's Paul George. We can't ignore the situation involving Paul George. I'm here to tell you, Max, one of the nicest dudes you'll ever want to meet in your life. Impossible to root against. He is a star in this league, but nevertheless, boy, did he not show up. It was Brick City. It was a straight choke job on his part as well. And what the biggest thing about Paul George that he needs to pay attention to, Paul George is in danger. Are you ready for this, Max? He's in danger of becoming the second coming of Dwight Howard. Remember, Dwight Howard was the man in Orlando.
Wow. I'm going to disagree heartily on that statement, Stephen A. Smith. Dwight Howard, when he was on the Orlando Magic, he led his franchise to a conference finals appearance and an NBA finals appearance. Paul George has never led his team to an NBA finals appearance. Dwight Howard has won 3 Defensive Player of the Year awards back to back to back. And Dwight Howard was top 3 in MVP voting. And Dwight Howard was a top 3, top 5 player during that 2009 through 2010 or 11 kind of phase around within there in the NBA. We had always had LeBron, Kobe, then you had around Dwight Howard, then you can kind of go Dwayne Wade, Dirk, et cetera, et cetera. But with Paul George has never been, quote unquote, around a top 3 player in the league, not really a top 5 player in the league. And Paul George has always been usually around the top 10, top 15, top 20. PG did, whenever he was on the Pacers, he was very close to making the NBA Finals in 2013, going to Game 7. But, again, you had the Miami Heat with LeBron James, so there's no way you're going to get past them when it comes down to it. But to say he would be the next Dwight Howard 2.0, not at all. Paul George has always been a second option pretty much for a championship team in his career, usually a second option. If he's a number one option, he can take you with a team with a great coach and a system built around him that's not heavily reliant on his scoring. Then, yeah, the Indiana Pacers fit his role to be a number one option for a contender. But as we saw back into 2015, I believe, he got bounced in the first round, being a number one option. And then going to the Oklahoma City Thunder and now to the Los Angeles Clippers, he's a number 2 option. So I don't want to hear that comparison.
Just like Paul George was the man in Indiana. He wanted to leave. He goes to L.A., he ends up going to Houston, and then before long, he's a journeyman, Washington, Charlotte, etc. Because the star that he once was, he was no more. And so because of that, everybody said
Paul George is not going to be a journeyman. He's already played on 3 NBA franchises with the Indiana Pacers, the Oklahoma City Thunder, now the Los Angeles Clippers. I expect him to be with the Clippers pretty much the whole tenure when Kawhi Leonard's going to be on that franchise. So I don't want to hear any of these trade talks of Paul George.
As they harken back to that, he should have never left Orlando. That was an ideal situation for him. They built the franchise around him. Even though he didn't win a chip, they got to the finals in 2009. And now Dwight Howard is a role player. Even though I think he's doing an exceptional job in L.A. in a reserve role, and I think he's going to play a big role in this series along with JaVale McGee and Anthony Davis. Triple teaming, basically throwing 3.
Oh, Dwight Howard has been eating against Nikola Jokic in the Denver Nuggets. This is an ideal matchup for him to be playing in this series. Listen, a lot of cats were they were mad and they didn't want the Lakers to pick up Dwight Howard because of his quote-unquote drama, and they thought he was washed. I never got into that. I was actually super excited and wanted the Lakers to pick up Dwight Howard. Because you got to remember, Dwight Howard played with the Hawks, the Hornets, the Wizards. He was playing on bum teams and franchises. Dwight Howard's now on a chance and a time to be with a contender, a championship contender with LeBron James on your team. So you're expected to make the finals and win the championship. So Dwight Howard, he's not going to be able to pretty much be petty around and party and, cause all this drama and nonsense, because you got to be humbled. You're on this team for a reason. They can drop you at any second, and you're going to fit the role as what they're needing. So I knew that parties would mesh together, and Dwight Howard actually was doing a lot better than what I expected. So kudos to him.
Headed monster at Jokic on the defensive side of the floor. But in the end, what it comes down to is that if you're Paul George, okay, you win Indiana. Then you win OKC. Now you're in LA with the Clippers. And Max just said in order for this team to get the parts that it needs, even though I don't agree with you, you're talking about how you'd have to move Paul George in order to do that. So I think all of those things elevate.
Oh, whoa. Wait, Max Kellerman said they need to move Paul George. Okay, hold up. I got to hear this.
The level of incentive. I think you keep the Clippers as is, stand pat. They were embarrassed. They're highly motivated. You anticipate that the pandemic won't stall next season, that you'll move full steam ahead. And I think you keep them together for one last run. Remember, both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, 2-1. 2 years with a third-year option for each player. They could have signed for a 4-year deal or whatever. Neither of them did it. They can opt out after this upcoming season. This season could be on the line. If you're Ballmer, I think you give everybody one more shot, letting them know I will clean house in a heartbeat, and y'all will be gone from Tinseltown if y'all don't get it done next.
No, sir. Far from the truth. Steve Ballmer and the crew, they were happily excited to bring in Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. They haven't had a star player since Chris Paul and Blake Griffin on their team and franchise. Listen, with the Los Angeles Clippers, even if they don't win the championship in 2021, they're going to extend another 5-year contract for Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. I mean, Kawhi Leonard, of course, but Paul George may be a different type of deal when it comes to it. I don't understand what Stephen A. is saying. There's no way Steve Ballmer is going to clean ship whenever they traded away 6 first-round picks for Paul George. And there's no way you're ever going to trade Kawhi Leonard. So I'm not going to even continue that discussion of talk. That's just asinine statements right there. Listen, it's been 50 years now since they haven't made the conference finals. The Los Angeles Clippers will make the conference finals next season, 2021. You can book it. I'm not going to say they're going to win the championship or go to the finals or not. We'll see. That's to be determined. Kind of a far stretch for my 2021 Western Conference pick. It's either going to be the Lakers or the Clippers. Preferably, I think it probably will be the Clippers based on where they're at. But I don't know. We'll keep that up in the air as of right now. There's no other teams in the West except for the Lakers or Clippers next season. So I'm not going to rush into my judgment right now. We're still in the 2020 playoffs. But no, sir, you're not going to trade away Paul George or Kawhi Leonard. You're not going to clean ship. That makes no sense. I do understand that the 2021 season, after that, they're most likely going to opt out and become free agents. Not due to they'll go and leave to another franchise, but they want to get the bag and get a better contract to where they can make more money off the CBA, etc., etc. Kind of break it down, Kawhi Leonard, there's no way he's going to leave to another franchise. LA's where he wants to be. And pretty much as number one option, he's chilling where he's at. Well, Paul George, where else are you going to go? You have Kawhi Leonard as your number one option, and you're living in Los Angeles. So there's no way for him to leave it all. Even if they win the championship or not, or actually let's just say they didn't win the championship, they're still going to re-sign. Steve Ballmer's not going to blow up ship. They're fine where they're at. It's not... They're chilling. For me personally, I've always said with the Clippers, this is around a 3 to 4 year era plant where you can win a championship or two. So if they don't win the championship 2021, then probably in 22, 2023, they can squeak out one of them. But it's very bad how they lost in the second round in such bad fashion to the Denver Nuggets when majority of people had them going to the finals or let alone the conference finals.
Season, I keep them together.
Couple things. Paul George and Dwight Howard, to me, are very different. I understand you mean bouncing from team to team, but Paul George is a guy without
Yeah,
a
that's
real
all I was talking
weakness in
about.
his game. He's
That's
such
all
a
I meant.
well-rounded. He's such a well-rounded player. He's balled wherever he's been. The issue is he's miscast as a centerpiece. He's really what Paul George is best, as we see in the playoffs, is a top-notch kind of complementary player, but maybe not the second most important player on the team even when it matters most. Whereas Dwight Howard was much more one-dimensional, and as the league changed, it really didn't favor the way he played. I understand what you mean, though, bouncing around, but I think Paul George's intrinsic not only ability but well-rounded game will keep him as a very valuable player for a while, right? Whether or not he's really a guy you can rely on under pressure. In terms of the Clippers' motivation, yes, they will be highly motivated. But what you noticed about their offense was they didn't really have a creator. Who creates the offense? Really, it's Kawhi Leonard. When he draws, he's become a much better passer, and that's the guy who really you run the offense through. But is Kawhi best used that way in fact? Or should you get a more traditional ball handler like Drew Holiday, who can play off the ball also, obviously, who can shoot, who can defend, who steps up?
No, you don't bring Drew Holiday on your team. I think he's very overrated. He's always been a Cat for the last 3 seasons, starting from 2017 through 2019. He was pretty much a caliber all-star type player. Not directly there, but he was great for any franchise. But as of now, the Pelicans need to trade away Drew Holiday. I think he's declining where he's at. But kind of talking more about the Clippers, you're not going to trade away Paul George and have an alternate as Drew Holiday. No. Max Kellerman is right. They do need a ball handler on their team. I've stated on one of my other videos, and I've had this idea since the Clippers lost in the second round, they need a true point guard, a leader, someone who's vocal on their team, and that's Chris Paul. They need to make a trade. Personally, for me, I would trade away majority to all of the bench because you're going to have to clear up cap space of $40 million and bring in Chris Paul on your team. Have a core 3 of Chris Paul, Paul George with Kawhi Leonard, and you got to get veteran players who are hungry for a championship. That'll take a veteran's minimum, pay cut, and play alongside them. You got to get rid of Doc Rivers as your head coach, and you're going to have to fill that in with a coach who really is not just a screamer motivator, but a coach who's actually designed for X's and O's, an offensive plan, not just throw out Paul George and Kawhi Leonard playing street ball out there, and having rotations to where you're not putting Zubac in the game enough. You need to find a big man as well. But no, Drew Holiday is not the answer for this team. I believe it's Chris Paul.
Big time under pressure. And in order to get a guy like that, I agree, you're best off keeping Kawhi and Paul George. But then the question becomes that entire supporting cast. Like if I asked you, Stephen A., if you had to move Montrezl Harrell and Patrick Beverley, would you do it for as I mentioned Lou Williams, for Drew Holiday? I would. What if you had to also get rid of Lou Williams? Like, in other words, what if you had to give...
No, again, I'll one-up you, Max Kellerman. Instead of going for Drew Holiday, you're going to go out there and get Chris Paul instead. Drew Holiday's nice, but no.
Everything you had except your centerpiece players for a guy like that. And then you try to fill in the blanks like the Lakers just did. The Clippers may be better off doing that. And by the way, no knock against Montrezl Harrell, who played poorly, but was completely outmatched by Jokic. Like, he's not in Jokic's class. There's nothing he can do with Jokic. It doesn't mean he's not a good...
Well, that's coaching problems, Mr. Kellerman. That's on Doc Rivers. You need to leave Zubac back in the game if you have Jokic on the floor. Again, free agency, they need to pick up some bigs on their team. And guys who can move off the ball, guys who can be able to work in the perimeter as well. They did terrible at that. I mean, you signed Joakim Noah, but you didn't even play him. You have JaMychal Green, who's kind of undersized. You would run him a couple times, but that couldn't get it done with. So,
player. He's a solid player. He's just not a star.
Well, thank you for that soliloquy. My retort would be this. 13 rebounds to 2 is a problem when you're looking for a new contract if you're Montrezl Harrell. That's number one. That's more important. That's most importantly to point out. And number two, what it really comes down to again is I am not saying that you couldn't do things to buffer your chances as a championship. What I'm saying is it's a long shot that you're going to be able to pull all of those things.
I'm going to stop the video here. A lot of cats are really overblowing the scenario of trading Paul George or quickly firing Doc Rivers or, blowing up the team, et cetera, and pushing this on. The Clippers are fine where they're at. I never expected them to win the 2020 championship as it was. Storyline was always for the Lakers. I think 2021 is the best scenario for the Clippers to win a championship, let alone go to the NBA Finals when it comes down to that. But I think Doc Rivers should be let go. I don't think it's a must, but I think it's complimentary for the team and how their direction is. I think you really need to go for Chris Paul to pair up the big three of Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. But if it's not Chris Paul, you need a true point guard on the team and a big as well. So if you're a point guard, try to make a trade maybe for Ricky Rubio. You can get DJ Augustine as your point guard on the team. There's a couple other cats as well, but Patrick Beverley really needs to work outside his range. And you got to figure out the Montrezl Harrell situation. He may get paid somewhere else like Charlotte. He'll probably get paid like 17 to 20 million somewhere else. But who knows if they can keep him or not. Steve Ballmer's got the money, so is what it is. But kind of leave it up on here with Paul George, the Dwight Howard scenario, and next steps for the Clippers. Peace.